So fans of the old Android browser will be disappointed to hear that it's not in the latest version of Android anymore. It's the Chrome is yeah, brilliant. Yeah, sorry about that. Yeah, the default browser is now Chrome in 4.4. But not only that, but the WebView that's used by native applications, that's now Chrome as well. So you can make native applications using a mixture of the best of native and mix that with the best of the web. But what is the best way to do that? And the answers, I believe, are going to vomit out of the mouth of our next speaker. Are you ready to go?
I hope so, yes.
Excellent. OK, welcome our next speaker. It's Matt Gaunt.
Thank you, everyone. Wow, what an entrance into a talk, vomiting out of my mouth. Thank you, Jake. So yeah, this session is going to be about building mobile apps with the brand new Chrome WebView. My name is Matthew Gaunt, if my clicker would work. There we go. I'm a developer advocate from the London office. Generally, there seems to be this trend of having stupid photos of yourself. If you've ever seen Paul Kinlan or Paul Lewis doing a presentation, yeah. I don't know what this face is. I wish it didn't exist. So I have to publicize it, apparently. Before I start giving this talk, I have to give a disclaimer. I feel like the minute you start talking about bringing web technologies into a native stack, there's instantly kind of a flame war. I don't want to go into that, but ultimately, I am a native developer. Before I joined Google, I largely focused on Android, but I did iOS, BlackBerry, Nokia Qt. And towards kind of the end, when I was working at that company, we were doing a lot of stuff with bringing web technologies into our native apps. We were using JavaScript as the back end. And then as we started moving more and more forward, we kind of got to this point where some companies, they couldn't do native apps. Things like gambling, you're not allowed in the app stores with that. And our designers were kind of excited by this point, because at that point, it was like, well, cool, HTML5, CSS3, this is awesome. And seeing them, where they've had years of experience doing J2ME and all these different apps, they just ran with HTML5 and CSS3. And for me, I loved what they were doing. The biggest problem that I had was it's just like, well, you're still in the web. If you want a presence in the App Store, which many people did, how do you bring this web stack into an app? Because normally the web views, they kind of are a bit rubbish. And that's why I was really excited, because if you didn't hear, and Jake's kind of announced it, we actually swapped out the Android WebView with the Chrome WebView. So we've got M30 now in KitKat, which is awesome. It means that we get this kind of slightly disappointing score of 284, and it gets bumped up to 424, which is awesome. And it's not just the fact that we get HTML5 and CSS3 features that we didn't have before. We've also got the V8 JavaScript engine, which is much faster than the older WebView. But even the more important thing is going to be the devtools that you all know and love. One of the questions I always get is features that kind of come with this. So it means you get IndexedDB, request animation frame, insanely important when it comes to performance, SVG filters and effects. Jake Archibald has done a fantastic blog post on SVGs, and I've seen a number of things come out of it that are awesome. WebSockets, you may not really think about this, but I love this for live reload, insanely a lot. And then there's more, but I'm not going to talk about them. So for me, when it comes to developing mobile web apps using the WebView, it kind of comes down to three different things. There's the workflow, which for me is really different between native and web apps. I'm going to go into it in a minute. Native features, that's probably one of the main reasons why you're using the WebView in an app, is because you want access to something more. And then you've got, obviously, the design. I don't know if any of you guys had some of the really early Android devices, but if you saw the design of some of those apps, they were kind of cringy. And I think one of the major things that most of the mobile platforms have done is they've done design guidelines. And the developers have gone, OK, cool, I'll follow these and produce beautiful apps. So how does that apply in this scenario? So let's start with workflow. Generally, if you see a native developer coding, they will do this cycle. Code, compile, repeat. You could arguably say that we all do the same in the very, very early days, where we'd sit there, we'd write some code in HTML, CSS, we'd go to our browser, hit refresh, and that's our first web page done. But in the web, we have live reload. And it's insanely helpful because you just sit there, you code away, hit save, and then you're done. You just watch the effects just happen before you. So who here is familiar with Gradle? Not Gradle, Grunt. Start with Grunt. OK, so about 50%. So Grunt is a JavaScript task runner. So you can basically pull in third-party modules that basically will perform some action for you. So you can imagine you want something where when you say start my server, it will just start the server for you. It will compile your Sass. It will minify your JavaScript, your HTML, and just basically take care of a lot of housekeeping for you. So when you come to native, at the moment, we've got Gradle, which is new in the Android Studio. And Gradle is kind of similar in many respects. You pull in plugins that do a particular task. So one of the things that I wanted to do was join these two things together. I didn't want to have to sit there and have different workflows. I didn't want to compile and wait for this stuff to happen. So with the new WebView, we can actually get a nice flow going. So if I show you what we've got. So I'm going to open this. Oh, stop it. There we go. So this is a standard build file. So we've got things like just the Android task, which the Android team have put together in it. Basically, that is your Android build step. Now, you might notice down here we have this notion of product flavors. Now, the way you can think of product flavors, the canonical example is someone has a free and a paid app. Free ad might pull in adverts. The paid one, you don't get them. In this scenario, well, I want one that is going to be a static build. I want all the HTML, JavaScript, CSS to be in the app. And then the other one, I want to be able to do this live reload. I want it to be just running off of my machine. So if I show you a scenario here, oh, you need to see the actual thing. So here we've got two applications, one on the left, which is just a static build, and then we've got another one on the right, which is my live server. And all things willing and the network playing nice, this will work. Yeah, there we go. So all I have to do is just hit save, and that will go and update itself on the other side. There we go. Now, the really nice thing with this is it's surprisingly simple just to get set up. You don't have to do anything. You are essentially defining this product flavor, and then you're switching out a URL. There's nothing else beyond that. And the nice thing with the static build is that when I come to say, I want you to build me a brand new project, down the bottom, there's just these small couple of tasks. And basically, what we've got here is this little beautiful piece of code here. It's basically saying when Android Studio goes, I'm going to build your Android app now. Is there anything you want me to do before I do that? It will say, well, actually, I want you to copy my web application. And then before it does that, what you can actually say is, well, before you copy my web application, could you actually, maybe build it and run it with grunt? And essentially, that's what these two steps here are doing. And they're really simple little tasks that just say grunt build. It goes and performs that task, and afterwards, it will copy it over and give you a brand new build of your application. So for me, this was an insanely useful workflow because I've seen a number of Cordova applications and the workflow with the command line interface where you kind of just say Cordova build or run Android, and it does an entire compilation step. So then, once you start combining this with DevTools, which I'm going to need to plug my phone in for. There we go. So the minute I plug in my device, you notice that in Chrome Inspect, we start seeing my device turn up with these two blocks. Now, basically, what this application is doing is displaying web views side by side because the performance is better for horizontal scrolling. But what's really nice is as I start scrolling my device left and right, you'll notice that the blocks very helpfully start moving backwards and forwards as well. So the nice thing with this is now not only are you getting exactly the same experience that you get on desktop, but you are getting the full features. So there's the obvious example that I could do where I can sit there and edit slides. But the main thing that I think is slightly more impressive is if I go in here and start saying FPS Meter, and you can start seeing there that we're getting a similar sort of thing that we're used to across varying browsers. Well, for Chrome DevTools, should I say, which is insanely powerful. But what's even more impressive is as I start going through and I start wanting to combine different features, you'll realize that DevTools is actually starts becoming much more useful. This whole build step process, it still works with the old WebView. There's no difference. The main thing is you can't get live reload because of the lack of WebSockets. So the way that I can get around that is by basically saying, I'm going to add a refresh button, exactly the same that I would do with basically swapping out the URLs. So yeah, there is no DevTools support. Unfortunately, the old WebView is still going to exist. It's still not going to have DevTools. How many of you have heard of Winery out of interest? Surprisingly large number of hands. I feel sorry for you all. It is a very, very simple way of basically debugging in browsers that don't have remote debugging. You can get it through NPM and just add in a script. It's not ideal, but it does give you like at least something. And then there's JS High Bugger. Now, if you're using Cordova application, this is basically you can just have a plugin that will give you access to DevTools. And basically what it does is it rigs up the older WebView in Android and basically makes it appear in Chrome Inspect and works with the Chrome DevTools. So you start getting a wider support of features that Winery doesn't have. So we have our live reload, which is awesome. So the next step is going to be, well, how do I start adding features into my web application? Oh, useful. So there's two main methods when it comes to using the WebView and integrating native features. If you want to inject JavaScript into the WebView, there's this method, evaluate JavaScript. And that's just basically the same as what you'd do if you were in a normal browser and you put JavaScript : inject whatever you will. To get stuff out of the WebView, so from JavaScript to call out into native code, you have this method, add JavaScript interface. Now, the way this works is you have something similar to this method here. And basically, add JavaScript interface takes two methods. This notification bind object, which is something that I've written, and it's a really bare bones JavaScript object, and I'll show you it in a minute. And this name, notification interface. And it's this name that you will use from JavaScript to access it. So if I go into DevTools for my device, I can, let's start again. Stop it. So if I go window.notification interface, this is where it's been injected into the WebView itself, and this is how the JavaScript would access it. So it's just a plain old object, and you don't get any more information than that. Now, if I go into the notification bind object, you notice there's no extending, no inheritance. But the important part is this method here, show notification, and the annotation just above it, at JavaScript interface. Now, the reason for that annotation is basically to say, I want JavaScript to be able to call this method. It came in for Jelly Bean MR2. Before that, essentially you have to be a bit mindful, because before that, technically JavaScript could call random methods you're not intending it to. So this method, show notification, takes a string and a message. And the main idea behind this is, I get rid of my beautiful FPS meter. So the idea with this is that when I hit this show notification button, which you can just about see, you'll notice there's a little Chrome icon that's just appeared up on the top. It just says, Chrome Dev Summit, you're awesome. So the really nice thing with what we've got in DevTools is I don't actually have to have the JavaScript be executing these native methods. I can do it directly from here. And there is the new notification. Now, that's a really nice way of working, because if you've got essentially one part of your team building the native component and you're focusing on the website, and they kind of turn around and go, hey, I've just done this. This is cool. Can you check this out? You don't need to be worrying about whether you've got a script to run this. You can basically just sit there and do it there and then from DevTools. The only thing you need is the WebView running. Covered it. In terms of the old WebView, I keep on clicking this. In terms of the old WebView, there is no evaluate JavaScript method. So you have to use load URL JavaScript colon. The main reason you'd want to use evaluate JavaScript rather than the old method in the new WebView is actually faster, because basically the WebView is expecting JavaScript. It's going to pass it slightly differently. Kind of think of it as a fast path. And the other one is obviously the minute you start using native features, it needs to be pointed out the fact that you're going to be running on different versions of Android. Stuff comes and goes. So you just need to be aware of that. Like Android Studio is very good at just pointing these kind of things out. As well as that, there's also a WebView samples that I've just put a link down at the bottom for. And that has examples of doing all of this as well as shimming out the loading of JavaScript, etc. So we have a workflow where we've got live reload working, and we have access to native features, and we have access to DevTools. So now we've got a nice environment where I can sit and code in my text editor. I can then debug it with DevTools, and it's quite a nice flow. We've got similar to what we'd have on desktop. So the next step is, what should we be concerned about when it comes to design? Generally, each native platform, one way or the other, is going to have a set of native components. And generally, they range from the small things like checkbox buttons to the much larger composite views. And for me, the biggest risk with web apps is generally that they fall into that uncanny valley approach of, well, I'm going to imitate the native platform because that's where I'm living. That's what I'm trying to do. And generally, I kind of go down the route of, if you want to have native components or native look and feel, then try and use the native components and don't imitate them. If you can't use the native components, then do something different. Even if it's something similar, just don't try and copy it straight out. Try and do the fact that the reason you're using it is because it's a nice UX. Generally, the main things that I point out that I think web apps are generally going to use, action bar, as well as tabs. And realistically, it's dead simple to actually add this for Android and iOS. Like, you can imagine a simple case where you can have something similar on both platforms. The view pager, this is essentially a way of having full screen views either side and then swipe from left and right. That's what I was using in DevTools, where I had the images moving in Chrome Inspect. And then the other common one is navigation drawer. If any of you have checked out Paul Lewis's weight tracker, he's got like a similar thing. And the main reason I point this out is I think the Android team have spent a lot of time ensuring that certain paradigms are met with this. You'd be surprised the number of different versions of the same thing exist. So who here kind of feels like just creating a button on the web is nice and easy and there shouldn't really be any kind of thought behind it? Everyone? So one of the common things I tend to find when it comes to this is when I start touching these buttons, I just start getting this weird blue state that comes up over it. So this one at the top is an anchor tag. The one at the bottom is just a HTML button. I get this weird orange outline on the bottom one. And I see this come up time and time again. And to be honest, depending on the design, it can either kind of blend in or it just really stands out. So I'm going to change these buttons. So to get rid of this blue tap highlight color, the main thing you need is WebKit-tap highlight color. Hit save. And then if I want to get rid of the orange outline as well, we just need to set outline to 0. Go on, update. So, oh, I know why. Right, this time with live reload, go. So it's just two simple things, but now you can see that the state just does nothing, which is exactly what we want. From that, you just need to do no state button active. So the key here is just the active state. Set background color. I'm going to go for blue. So come on. Oh, of course. Yep, so grunt should be taking care of SAS. There we go. So we've got state. Now, who thinks we're done? Who can say what's missing? Anyone? So the trick here is if I go and touch this button and hold it, I get that beautiful little nugget. Now, I won't say you should blanket disable user select because there's a number of cases. Like if that was a phone number, copy and paste is kind of cool. It's a text button that I really wouldn't want that to be there. So the simple fix for that is user select none. So when that updates, there we go, nothing. Now, I don't know about you guys, but that kind of makes me a bit sad, the fact that I have to disable one prefix thing, one outline, and then implement something completely different, and then also handle the fact that I don't want the user to copy and paste it to basically match a native button. But at the same time, it kind of sounds a bit laborious to pay this amount of minute detail to something, but you do it once, you're there, you're good. And you only do it for the components that you have in your web app. And ultimately, I want frameworks to start just basically implementing exactly this kind of same thing, because it's essentially really, really small little nuggets of things that I see a number of developers do, and it's quite a simple fix. And the other thing that I kind of wanted to talk about was to kind of reinforce this notion of not trying to imitate native. Like, we've all seen web trends. Like, it's kind of one of the great things about the web in general is someone comes up with this beautiful design, and then we start seeing other designers be inspired by it and producing similar kind of things. And for me, native apps don't move in terms of trends as fast as the web. So why try and imitate native? Why not just keep this going, but actually bring it to native platforms? For me, this is what I want to see web apps do. Take the things that work and make sense, and then bring them into mobile apps and show native apps the kind of things that the web is great at. So that's kind of what I wanted to talk about, was this notion of having a nice build process where you can have live reload. You don't have to sit in Android Studio and constantly keep on compiling. You can have native features using the Inject JavaScript as well as a JavaScript interface. And then we've kind of covered design. And for me, it's one of those things that from those three things, it should be simple enough to actually get going, something that didn't exist with the old WebView. You couldn't do this. So if you go away from this talk not really remembering any of this talk, there's two things that I want you to really remember. The first one is this uses SDK, Android target SDK version equals 19. Now, the reason for this is 19 is Android KitKat. And if you set it to anything lower than 19, you basically put the WebView into a compatibility mode. So to avoid any of the web applications from breaking from Jelly Bean to KitKat, we emulated some behavior that existed in the old WebView. So things like target density DPI. It's been dead for a very, very long time, but there are still apps using it and kind of relying on it for their UI. So to rip it out would mean we'd be breaking a load of apps. Unfortunately, though, if you are following everything, this can still have adverse effects if it's lingering around. You start seeing differences between the two. So make sure you add target SDK version 19. The other thing is you will want to do this set web contents debugging enabled to true. The main reason for this is if you don't call this method, you won't have access to DevTools in the WebView. It's basically it. You don't have to leave it on. You can basically switch this on and off depending on whether it's a debug build of your app or whether it's a release build. But one way or another, when you're first starting out, you're going to want to use this. So in terms of what the future looks like for the WebView, the old WebView is still going to be important one way or the other. It's still the predominant version, like Jelly Bean is the predominant version of Android devices. So unfortunately, you still have to kind of support it, unless you're happy to go for KitKat onwards, which I wouldn't blame you if you did. And I think at the moment, updates are still tied to Android releases with the new WebView. And generally, everyone in the team wants this to move to auto-updating. We kind of see it as kind of the one thing that we really want to change. We just need to figure out how we're going to do it. Because basically, the WebView is part of the Android framework, and nothing at the moment changes itself. So we're trying to figure out how we can do it. And the other thing is the Chrome apps team. We're actually bringing in a lot of the Chrome apps APIs to Cordova as plugins. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the usage of that. If you've got a Chrome app already that you're relying on native features that are coming in through Chrome Apps API, you can now start getting it on mobile. So the 3 talks I'd say go and check out. Perf Matters, which is Tom and Nat. They'll be covering things that basically should help you write 60 frames per second apps for the WebView. Paul Kinlan will be covering best UX patterns for the mobile web. And that's generally just the things that you should be thinking about when you're developing mobile web apps. And then Joe Marini is going to be covering develop Chrome apps for desktop and mobile. So thank you, everyone. I've got a set of links, Chrome docs, Android docs, some samples. And if you've got a web application already out there, there's a migration doc, which basically covers a lot of the common gotchas when you're moving from the old WebView to the new one. So yeah, thank you, everyone.